Hi, it's such a joy to be here in San Sebastian, and I'm so sorry that I can't speak Spanish at all. I was invited by Sasha to the Basque Centre last year for something else, and I couldn't come, but it planted a dream of San Sebastian in my head. People kept telling me, you just haven't eaten until you go to San Sebastian. And I went to Bilbao once, but my Spanish-speaking friends say, no, not the same, very good, but still not the same. And I've been asked to speak about what is food, and maybe the answer to what is food is simply what you eat here in San Sebastian. But I think I might have to make the definition a little bit broader than this. What is food? You could start with the land. Food is what the land gives us. Food is what farmers give us. Think how different the landscape of the world would look if no one ever chose to eat a piece of chicken. There are entire foodscapes in Kenya which are entirely formed around the British appetite for green beans. But I'm going to talk about food less in terms of producing and more about eating. One answer is that food is the thing that got us all here today. Even if you didn't eat breakfast, your blood, your heart, your skin, your brain, they're all doing what they do, in part because of what you ate yesterday. The simplest definition of food would be to say it's what we eat. Food is what we put in our mouths and chew and swallow and sip and digest. Food is the most intimate thing in the world, as Hector suggested, apart from sex, because we take matter from outside ourselves and put it inside ourselves, and it then becomes part of us. We are bodies built by food, and this is such a weird thought that I think we often suppress it and try not to think about it, unless we are bodybuilders who are trying to think of our muscles as being created by steak or egg whites. If you could see inside this left thigh, I think it would be solid butter, unsalted. And because it's spring in Britain at the moment, this thigh would be purple sprouting broccoli with garlic. This arm is nothing but coffee. This one's bread. And there is a huge part of my brain that I feel is taken up with Parmigiano cheese, which is one of my favorite ingredients. Obviously, it doesn't work like that. In his book, The Hungry Soul, the philosopher Leon Kass observed that even if we are head to toe made up of protein, vitamins, and minerals, we don't look as if we are. Brillat-Savarin was wrong. We are not exactly what we eat. Leon Kass wrote, chicken embryos digest egg yolk and grow into egg-laying chickens. Human children eat egg yolks and grow up only human. How can this be if one is what one eats? But there are so many more complications in the modern world, especially. Food can't just be defined as something that we eat, because humans are very strange and we eat all kinds of things that aren't really edible. Young children chew on pencils and even paper. In the summer, they go in the garden and nibble on blades of grass. But adults, too, have been known to eat things that stretch the meaning of the word food. We eat things with zero fat and almost zero calories, which give our bodies nothing to sustain them, nothing to digest. And we act as if this is somehow a good thing. When I was in Britain, before I flew yesterday, I just went in a shop and thought, I just want to buy something that's not food. And it's almost easier to buy things that are not food now in food shops, certainly in Britain, than it is to buy something that is food. Take this, for example. This is marketed as a dessert for a child's lunchbox. It's supposedly a strawberry-flavored jelly, but it contains no gelatin, no strawberries. It's sweetened with artificial sweeteners. I can't even see how many calories it has, but it's something like 20 calories in a pot. How is that food? It's just not food. And yet we don't call these things out. We just walk past these things and somehow accept them as if they're normal. And they're not normal. We should be outraged. Our senses should be telling us this is just an affront. Food can be many things. It can be entertainment, it can be culture, it can even be art. But I think we've sometimes forgotten that our first job when eating, and certainly when feeding our children, is to nourish ourselves and to nourish them. Unless food is sustenance, something that keeps you alive and gives you energy and strength, it's not food. The most striking aspect of human food is that it's so variable. All living things eat, but most animals have specific tastes and predetermined food. The anteater eats only ants, but there is no such thing as a universal human food except for breast milk. It's an amazing and potentially wonderful aspect of being alive and being human and eating that we can take pleasure from so many different flavors. If we ask what is food, people all over the world should give different answers to that question. And something very disturbing and wrong is going on when children all over the world now have the same idea of what is food. And if you ask them what is food, they say pizza or they say ice cream. And there are these globalized, homogenized tastes. That's fundamentally a way in which our eating is not food. In the wild, as hunter-gatherers, food is something we have power over it. Whether we're eating a mollusk or a wild herb or a bird, it's our prey. So why does it so often feel in the modern world as if we were now the prey of the food rather than the other way around? Hector spoke about the danger of being eaten. I would say that we are the first generation in history to be hunted by our own food. For thousands of years, in some places more than others, the basic fact about food was always its scarcity. No one except the rich could ever have enough of it. People then were not hunted by food, but haunted by its lack. As for sweetness, it was something that honey hunters would scramble up mountains on perilous expeditions to get, and they might come back empty-handed. Now, if you go off on an expedition to buy something sweet, you never come back empty-handed. We're hunted by food in the sense that it's omnipresent. Wherever you look, there are billboard posters advertising these non-foods, telling you you would be younger, you would be prettier, you would live longer, you would have more friends if only you ate more potato chips, candy bars, everything, more of everything. And we're hunted by food in the sense it does us so much harm. We now know that poor diets cause more disease and death in the world than tobacco smoke. How can this be when the fundamental purpose of food is to sustain life? Michael Pollan famously used the phrase food-like substances to describe all kinds of rubbish like this that's for sale in modern supermarkets. But I would go further. I would say it's not just that the substances we eat in the modern world are food-like. It's that so much of our eating takes the form of an anti-food because it does the opposite of feeding us. How can we possibly get away from all of these anti-foods and back to food? One of the ways our food has changed is that in affluent countries, we're almost never hungry anymore. A rise in snacking means that whereas the average person in the United States in the 1970s would leave 4 hours between meals, they now leave 3 hours. And that's based on survey data. We know that no one ever tells the truth when a researcher asks them what they eat, so it's probably much more. I see this endless eating as a kind of noise. It's a kind of disruption. Without silence, there can be no music. Can there really be food if we are never hungry? Sometimes people say, food is just fuel. Why do you have to make it so complicated? And some people in the modern world have even decided to opt out of the complexity of food altogether. I don't know if you have these weird products in Spain. We certainly have it in Britain, and I recently went to India and they said they have it there. These meal replacement drinks. The American one is called Soylent. The British one is called Huel. And the idea is that instead of wasting time on meals, I mean, my word, it's so messy. Why would you want to sort of have all that washing up? You just drink one of these things and get back to your screen, get back to what's important. I find it so sad. A London newspaper recently ran an article headed Lady Petrol. It was talking about a new vogue for these drinks, protein shakes specifically marketed at women. I can't tell you how much I hate this phrase, Lady Petrol. It saddens me to my core. Women are not cars. We cannot be satisfied by petrol. We need food. And human food is always complicated. It's never just fuel. From babyhood onwards, food is bound up with all these other factors and emotions, from celebration to family to love to culture to religion. Here are some of the aspects of food you don't get when you mix up a powdered shake and down it alone at your desk in front of a screen. You don't get conversation and the pleasure of sharing something around a table. You don't get flavour, or rather you get a flavour so vile that even a lot of the people who drink these shakes say that it takes a few days to adjust to the feeling of nausea. You don't get interesting textures, just a nondescript slurry in your mouth. You don't get cuisine. But I recently interviewed a very interesting Chinese-American young man called Dan, who made me think differently about these drinks. Dan told me that when he was growing up in China, in the Kunming region, he ate the most wonderful food. He ate broths and noodles and fresh local vegetables, and he never would have dreamt of drinking Soylent. But then his family moved to the West, first to Canada and then the United States, and he became a student. And he said the kind of choices available to him as a student in the town where he lived was so bad that he would rather save his money and not spend it on a greasy hot dog or a bad slice of pizza. He would rather just drink a cheap and easy glass of Soylent at lunchtime, cancel out his hunger and get on with his day, and defer his real eating until the evening, when he would cook for himself dishes of pork and greens and rice and soy sauce. After this conversation, I suddenly started to think about modern food in a different way. If not eating has come to seem a better option for intelligent people like Dan, just how bad has food itself become? Good food should be something we recognize with our senses. Discovering what is food for humans is always a process of trial and error. But at the moment, it feels as if we're trapped in a kind of giant experiment in which we can't seem to recognize our own errors. To take one huge example, many people's senses still tell them that sweet foods are good and very sweet foods are extra good, even as type 2 diabetes and obesity are becoming endemic across the world. Sugar is one of the biggest anti-foods. Sugar is a delight. As Hector said, dessert is ethereal. It should be wonderful. It's what you eat when you're already full and you don't need it to satisfy your hunger. But now millions of people are using sugar as a staple food to satisfy hunger. Sugar was never meant to be about nourishing yourself. It was about entertainment. It was about amusement. But sugar is now present in 80% of supermarket foods in the United States and Britain. And thousands of children have learnt to satisfy not just their hunger, but their thirst with sweetness. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors knew that sweetness signaled something good to eat and that bitterness might signal toxins. But in today's world, we need to learn new facts about sweetness. So one of the biggest things about food that I think we forget, and I wrote about this in my book, which in Spanish I think is called El Primer Bocado, but I may have said that wrong, even though it's my own book. First Bite, it's called in English. But one of the most important facts about food is that we're not born knowing what food is, we learn it from babyhood onwards. Unlike breathing, eating is not a skill that we're born with mastery over. We're born with the potential for learning how to feed ourselves. A parent feeding a child is teaching them what food is. At the most basic level, we have to learn what is food and what is poison. And we also have to learn how to interpret the almost infinite language of flavour and texture. We're born with an olfactory system that is incredibly receptive to the world around us. A biologist called Linda Buck found that the human flavour system is so highly attuned we can recognise 10,000 different smells, and that becomes even more complex if you add in the gustatory element on the tongue. We can walk into the house and we instantly know that someone is cooking roast chicken and that they decided to stuff it with rosemary instead of thyme. If dogs are animals governed by their sense of smell, humans are animals ruled by flavour. It may not always feel like it, especially if you are a parent trying to persuade a picky child to eat his or her vegetables. But human beings are born amazingly open-minded about what food is. We are malleable in our tastes. We remain malleable the whole of our lives, even if we don't often feel as if that's the case. I wanted to tell you a story to demonstrate just how open-minded children are if they're given the chance. There was a doctor in the 1920s and 30s in America called Clara Davis. She did an amazing experiment. It would never be allowed today. It was completely unethical because she more or less kidnapped these children and locked them up in an experimental nursery just because she was so determined to find out the truth about human tastes. She took 15 babies who had never eaten a bite of solid food in their lives. Some of them were orphans and some of them had single mothers. And I still don't know quite how she obtained consent or if she did obtain consent. But what she wanted to see was if a child learnt to eat without a big grown-up standing over them saying, eat your vegetables, eat this, don't eat that, that's bad, that's a treat, that's good, that's delicious, that's not delicious. How would people eat if they were allowed just to be free? And she offered them a range of totally pure, whole, unprocessed foods. And a nurse sat by their side, and if the child couldn't manage to eat it, the nurse would help them with a spoon, but she wasn't to offer any opinion on what food was good or bad. The children were offered carrots, both cooked and raw, beef, brains, bone marrow, sour milk, oatmeal, cauliflower, cabbage, peaches, apples, bananas, chicken, wheat, spinach, barley, oranges, salt, lettuces, and a few other things. And what she found was that left to their own devices, each of the children ate in a slightly different way. Out of 15 children, there were 15 different patterns of taste. This comes back to humans being omnivorous. It's wonderful. We should celebrate this difference more. But each of them somehow managed to construct a diet that served them very well. When they arrived, some of the children were underweight, they were malnourished. But by the time they left the orphanage, they had cured themselves of any diseases they had, and they were all well nourished. Some of their choices looked very strange. One child ate nothing but oranges for a couple of days. Some of them would grab whole handfuls of salt and just stuff it in their mouths and then look very surprised. One child ate nothing but liver for a day, or bananas. But what this experiment shows once again is that human food can take countless different forms, which makes it all the more sad that so much of what we eat now does not deserve the name of food at all. The experiment that Clara Davis really wanted to do was to find out what would happen if you offered a child a choice between these real foods, whatever they might be, and junk foods, the 1930s version of junk foods, which was kind of packaged biscuits and pies and cakes and sugary stuff. But her funding ran out and she never did that experiment. Would a child still eat bone marrow and liver when offered a hamburger? Would they still eat oranges if they could have a candy bar instead? I think the answer to this question is all around us. Given the choice between food and anti-food, you would think our bodies would know automatically to choose food. But sadly, it seems this is not so. Our receptors for food, as clever as they are, have not yet learnt what to do with faulty messages. Maybe it comes back to the coding idea of the first talk. You drink a strawberry milkshake. Your brain tells you it tastes like strawberries, even though it contains not a single berry. Your tongue tells you it's thick, which suggests it's full of nourishing dairy fat, even though really the thickness comes from an array of emulsifiers and starch. What happens to our concept of food when food lies? We should be able to look at a 2-litre bottle of sugary soda or a 2,000-calorie fast food meal and reject it as poison. But for millions of people around the world, that's not the case. The term malnutrition has now been expanded to cover overnutrition as well as undernutrition. Obese populations, it turns out, suffer disproportionately from micronutrient deficiencies such as lack of zinc and iron. Whatever we're eating, it's not food. A sample of Iranian teenage girls found that the overweight and obese ones were more likely to suffer from iron deficiency than the non-overweight ones. To some people, that's surprising. They say in judgmental terms, surely obese people are eating too much. But there isn't much iron or other kinds of nutrients in ice cream or chips or fast food pizza, all newly popular food on the streets of Tehran. To eat an excess of calories without enough nutrients is definitely a form of anti-food. We are being stuffed and starved by our food at the same time. But some people, and I know this is going to be the topic of Stephen Poole's talk tomorrow, so I won't talk about it too much, but some people have become so disturbed by the poison of our food supply that they flip the other way, and they can no longer recognize real food when they see it. Clean eating, I don't know what the Spanish term is for this. Clean eating is a movement that says nothing can be food unless it is nutritionally perfect, whatever that means. Clean eating says that food is not food unless it makes you young and beautiful and skinny. They say that food is not food unless it is kale and quinoa and coconut oil and sweet potato. The clean eating gurus, along with other diet gurus, look at perfectly wholesome, traditional, staple foods such as bread and rice, and they only see carbohydrate-laden, gluten-laced junk. They look at food, and instead of asking, is it delicious, they only say, what will it do for my body? Will it make my skin glow? Will it make me live longer? Is it morally perfect? Such gurus advise strange combinations of ingredients that no cook in the past would ever have combined. They certainly do not understand the syntax of cooking. I recently read in one of these diet books that if you were trying to avoid bread, a lettuce leaf makes a good substitute. What crazy world are we living in when people can make such assertions and find believers? This clean eating is another kind of anti-food because it encourages you to ignore your own senses and be scared of food. There is a deep disrespect at the heart of it, a disrespect for cuisine, a disrespect for the ways in which our ancestors learnt to nourish themselves in the past. I read in another of these diet books that rice makes you bloated. What? So everyone in India, in China, in Vietnam and Korea is bloated. Thanks for that. How on earth do we escape this craziness? The craziness on the one hand of a toxic, falsified, poisoned food supply. The craziness on the other hand of all of these false prophets of new anti-foods. And how do we get back to real food? Part of our trouble with eating is that we expect too much of it. We turn to the fridge as a form of diversion. We fill ourselves with foods or anti-foods when really we were hungry for company or amusement or physical contact. What we need to do, and it's easier said than done, is to learn how to eat all over again as if we were children. The change we are so desperate for from our diet is in fact possible. It is possible to reach the point where food is something that nourishes us, gives us joy, rather than sickens us and makes us guilty and unhappy. It's possible to return to food as something that gives rhythm to our days, rather than something that disrupts our days with constant snacks. In an ideal world, this change would involve the whole of society. It would involve not just sugar taxes, but governments prepared to intervene to protect us from the anti-foods that are killing us. It would take education of children in what is food and what is not food. And I know this is happening in some schools, in some places. There's a movement in France, in Finland, in Sweden, and it's now just come to the UK as well, called Sapere, which is about teaching children about food not through lectures on healthy eating, but through play, through fun, through the senses. If we want to stop being hunted by our food, we need to return to our senses. We need to recondition our palates until we taste the tube of chips or the can of soda and we think, too sweet, too salty, not food. As surely as when our hunter-gatherer ancestors spat out a bad weed or a suspicious berry. I once wrote a book about food fraud through history. One of my favourite quotes in it was from a wine expert in the 19th century called Cyrus Redding. He said that the best test against fake or adulterated wine was a perfect knowledge of that which is good. I love this because I think it applies to food in general. The best test against fake food is knowing what the real kind tastes like. So once you have tasted real strawberries, you wouldn't like that. This is not even a particularly nice fruit. It was just something I randomly grabbed. Once your senses know that fruit is like this, and it should smell, and it should look, and it should satisfy you before you've even taken a bite, it's harder to take pleasure from this. But if this is all you've ever known, and this is like mother's milk to you, then you don't know this. It's knowledge. What is food? Food is knowledge. But it's not the kind of knowledge that we access through logic. It's a kind of knowledge that we reach through our senses. We know food in our noses, in our eyes, and on our lips. Like our hunter-gatherer ancestors, sometimes our senses are the only thing that will protect us. Thank you. Do please ask questions.